You are listening to the Lawyer Stories podcast with host Benny Gold. Lawyer Stories was founded in July 2017 on Instagram and is an expanding global network of lawyers and law students sharing their personal journeys to the noble profession of the practice of law. Join us on this podcast as we dig deeper into these stories and hear from lawyers and law students from around the world in all areas of the legal profession. Here at Lawyer Stories, we believe that every lawyer has a story. What's yours?
This episode is brought to you by DB Podcasts, a premium podcast production agency. DBP offers a range of podcast services, including programming, master-level post-production, mobile recording equipment packages, distribution partnerships, and creative consulting. DBP specializes in working with clients who are constantly on the move, and they offer custom solutions so talent can record anytime, anywhere in the world with pristine sound and production quality. DBP clients include I Am Rappaport, Stereo Podcast with Michael Rappaport, Behind the Baller Podcast with Ben Baller, Lighthearted Podcast with Josh Hart, Best of the Best, Maverick's Guide to Success, and the podcast of our guest today, Blurred Laws and Life with Richard Bush. For more information, please visit dbppodcasts.com.
Welcome to the Lawyer Stories podcast with Benny Gold, episode 18. Today, we have the honor of having the famed copyright attorney, Richard Bush, on the show. How you doing out there, Richard?
I'm doing great, man. How are you?
Good, good. Coming to us from Miami today. It's awesome, beautiful Miami. Hopefully you're being safe out there. Florida's a bit wild right now. So
even though my background is the Golden Gate Bridge.
It is. So it's a bit confusing. It is confusing, but I do like Miami. So that's where we actually had our first joint Lawyer Stories party in January. But anyway, so before we get, you have such a body of work, like your cases are just super interesting. We don't go in, usually on Lawyer Stories, like we don't go in like super in depth in the cases, but because this is something that sort of piqued my interest from back in the day when there was like that 2 Live Crew case. I don't know, you probably know that case. With
I am
with
very
Roy Orbison, and that was a whole different legal issue, I think, than what maybe you've dealt with. But before we jump into the cases, so tell us, what. And a lot of your cases are of public interest because they're very interesting, and like a lot of people want to know about them. But where are you from, and why did you go to law school?
So I'm actually from Miami, Florida.
Okay.
And so that's why I still have a place here, even though we have offices in both Nashville, Tennessee, and in Los Angeles.
Cool.
I like coming back down to Miami. Why I went to law school, it's an interesting question. Well, I went to law school, I played baseball in college.
Nice.
I had dreams of playing Major League Baseball, to be honest. And when I realized that wasn't going to happen, I didn't really know what I was going to do as my senior year in college. And I basically took the LSAC with very little notice and with no preparation, and just decided to do it because I didn't know what I wanted to do and didn't know what job to try to get, and thought, well, maybe I'll go to law school. And I got into a law school after doing that, and that's why I went, because really I wasn't going to play Major League Baseball, and I wasn't prepared to get a real job.
Where did you play college ball?
I played at a small school in Illinois. It's called Augustana. The fame that Augustana has is Ken Anderson, the quarterback of the Cincinnati Bengals, played there. And it's a pretty strong athletic school for a smaller school.
That's awesome. I actually just went during the pandemic. I went through like a lot of my old baseball cards and stuff. It was like kind of cool. I hadn't seen them since like the 90s. I started looking them up, and like they're just not worth that much. But so like, so you just went there. You just didn't want to like leave school. Like you didn't want to get a job. Like, did you have did you have any inspiration? I guess you didn't really have like an inspiration for law school, like any lawyers in the family or anything?
No, definitely. In fact, I come from a very poor family. In fact, in Miami, we grew up in a little part of Miami called Carroll City. If you're familiar with Miami, you know that's a pretty tough neighborhood. I was pretty much the only white kid in my whole neighborhood. Okay. My dad died when I was like 10 years old, just me and my mom. And I pretty much got out of that neighborhood by because I played baseball. And so I had no real inspiration to be a lawyer other than I thought I could do it. And I had confidence in myself and didn't really know what I was going to do with my life. So thought law school sounded like an interesting way to go.
And then, so what I found out is you had, by the way, I got like somebody came in named Jordan. I think he was trying to come in. Do you want him to come in?
No, he's cool. He was just trying to make sure we were
okay,
cool. We were
very
good.
good.
Okay,
So
we're all good.
So I read, like, tell me about, this is interesting to me, and I'm sure this is like a turning point in your life, and I kind of want to flesh it out a little bit. Like, you had like you were doing like was it an antitrust case, a racketeering case in New York?
So what happened was,
and you jumped in a cab. It was snowing. You jump in a cab with somebody, and like the rest is history, right?
It's pretty much it. I went to New York as like a first-year associate, believe it or not, in the mid-90s, and we represented the New York Daily News. We represented the former owner of the Daily News, the Tribune Company, and essentially everyone at the newspaper filed what we alleged were fraudulent workers' compensation claims alleging hearing loss. And I was supposed to go up there to just investigate it. They had paid out millions of dollars of claims. There were millions and millions remaining, and the Tribune Company was self-insured, and they were all directed at the Tribune Company. And I went up there, supposed to be up there for like a week to investigate it. That week turned into several months, and my recommendation, several months later, after doing the investigation, I decided it was all fraud. I felt like we had to get out of the workers' compensation arena because I felt like it was not fair to the employer there, and I felt like this was all a conspiracy and a scheme. And I didn't know anything about RICO when I first went to New York, but I literally read every case on RICO, and I thought we had them. And on my recommendation, we filed a 600 defendant racketeering case against unions and doctors and lawyers and everyone who filed the claim. And I was up there for 5 years litigating that case. Of course, they weren't going to trust, to a 25-year-old kid, all of that. So we got co-counsel, experienced co-counsel, but was basically my case, and was up there for 5 years doing it. And yes, on my last day in New York, I shared a taxi cab with a dude. I was waiting outside of my building. It was snowing, couldn't get a taxi cab. Guy was standing next to me. I said, "Hey, you want to share the next cab that comes?" He said, "Sure." We hop in. He said, "What are you doing in New York?" I told him my story like I just told it to you. And I said, "I'm going back to Nashville now." And he goes, "Oh, my wife's in the music business, and we go to Nashville from time to time. Next time I'm there, give me your card. I'll give you a call. We'll have dinner." I had one card on me, gave it to him. And 6 months later, he calls me, and his wife worked for a company that owned the funk music of the 70s that was being sampled throughout rap music. George Clinton, Parliament Funkadelic, the Ohio Players. And they had 600 songs or 500 songs they'd identified, and they were looking for someone to handle it. And they thought Nashville would be a good place to do it. And she said, "You know what? Maybe if you go to Detroit and meet the owner, he'll hire you." And I said, "I don't know anything about music law. I don't know about copyright law." And she's like, "Oh, you can learn it." And I said, "Okay." So I went to Detroit. I met him. He liked me. He hired me. And like you say, the rest is history.
That's amazing. So that's like a fateful day in Manhattan, huh? That's like
that is an incredible day in Manhattan. And a lot of people say, wasn't it lucky, to be on that street, sharing that cab with that dude on that day. But I hate that, because to me, everything I had done in my life brought me to that moment where I met him. And if I had not done the investigation and recommended we file the racketeering claim and moved to New York and lived there for 5 years, I wouldn't have been standing there at that moment. And then, of course, I had to be good enough to win the cases. So
you went from one job to another right there? Like, you basically went 6 months later. When he called you, did you know who it was? You remembered the guy from the cab?
Well, I'm at the same law firm. So I joined my law firm as a first-year associate, and now, I'm pretty much the, senior guy there. And it's the same law firm. So I went to New York still with the same law firm. Then I came back to Nashville with the same law firm. But I'm sitting there now in my office back in Nashville thinking, what am I going to do? Why did I even come back? Like, I had this great experience, but I have no clients, and I love New York. So why did I even come back to Nashville? But I did. And then when he called me, he said, "Remember me?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I do remember you." And we had dinner. And like I said, that's his history, man. What can I say?
That's awesome. Congratulations. That's great.
Yeah.
So going into like some of your cases now.
And by the way, we filed that those 500 cases of copyright infringement. We won every case we tried.
Yep.
And we made law, like in several of those cases that are like, still taught in law school today. It established the law on music sampling. And then one of the cases you might be interested in to talk to me about is the Eminem digital download case, where we established that artists were being underpaid on digital royalties and were entitled to 50% of net receipts of the record label's money.
Because you said it should have been treated as a license, not a sale, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the interesting, PS to the first part of the story is that the guys who discovered Eminem grew up at the record studio of the dude from Bridgeport Music and Westbound who had hired me to represent him in those sampling cases. And he's the one that told them, when they told him about their idea to pursue this license for sale issue, they've got to come down to Nashville and meet me. And so again, had I not shared that taxi cab in New York, that wouldn't have happened either. And dude, I wouldn't be sitting here with you right now.
That's
so
crazy. Everything you've done, man. Everything you've done has brought you to this moment on the Lawyer Stories podcast, right?
Exactly. The greatest moment of my life.
Hey, it might be. You just never know. So like one guy who, like, this is another case that I definitely heard of, like, when it was going on, because this guy had a song that I was living in New Haven, I think, at the time, and like my friend would play the song all the time. It was like super sexy, like we'd be at the pool, he'd be playing the song on like repeat or something. But so Robin Thicke, his song, right? So you sued him. You sued him.
Well, that's not entirely correct.
Okay, or his label or his.
No. What I'm going to say is, when Marvin Gaye's family heard Blurred Lines, they immediately thought that it was a ripoff of Marvin's Got to Give It Up.
Right.
Here's the point. They wrote to Pharrell and Robin Thicke and tried to work something out, and Pharrell and Robin Thicke filed the lawsuit against the Gaye family.
Really?
For a quote unquote declaration of non-infringement, for a request of the court rather than negotiate, issue a declaration of non-infringement. And so we won that case, but
wait, did they get that declaration or no?
No, of course not, because we won. We won, and it was established, and the jury found that Blurred Lines did copy Got to Give It Up.
Okay, I didn't know if they got the declaration and then you ended up counter or whatever.
No, they did not. When they filed the lawsuit, it was not like a preliminary thing. When they filed the lawsuit, we immediately answered and counterclaimed for copyright infringement.
That's amazing. So did they do that? Did the Gaye family do that through an attorney? Like, they write the letter? Like, how do they get in touch with them? Like, how does that work?
So the Gaye family had a transactional lawyer.
Okay.
So he wrote to the lawyers for Pharrell and Robin Thicke, and interestingly, he, meaning the lawyer who it all comes back to that taxi cab. The lawyer who was a transactional lawyer for the Gaye family is also the transactional lawyer for the guys who discovered Eminem, and I got to know him through the digital download litigation, so that when the negotiations failed, he contacted me and said, "Hey, Richard, are you in here? We have this case. Are you interested?" And I said, "Of course, yes."
So let me ask you a question, like, with these cases, like, before we go on to the next one. So who, like, when they say, like, okay, this is infringing on they're sampling my music, this is infringing on sounds like my music, like,
right.
Is that a question for, like, the jury? Like, who listens to the music to make that determination?
Okay, so it is a two-pronged test in most circuits. So there's what's called the extrinsic test and the intrinsic test. So let's just say you have the copying of a musical composition. Well, the judge in the first instance decides, as a matter of law, whether there is sufficient evidence of copying of the compositional elements to put it to the jury. If you pass that, then the jury will decide will listen to the expert testimony and will decide whether that extrinsic test is satisfied. But you also must satisfy what's called the intrinsic test, and that's basically just the ordinary observer test. They listen and decide whether they think it sounds close enough.
Okay. Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
The ordinary observer test, like the reasonable person sort of test, right?
Yes, exactly. So it's a two-pronged test. You have to show sufficient compositional elements to that there is copying, but then if you satisfy that, or at least create a jury question on that, then that issue plus the intrinsic test issue goes to the jury, which is the ordinary observer test.
You know, I just had a thought. You remember Vanilla Ice's hit song "Ice Ice
Yes.
Baby"? Didn't that have some
Yes.
contention for a while?
Well, that was. I mean, I believe I don't think it was a lawsuit. I think it was a. It was obviously a David Bowie song,
Right.
But I think it was licensed. I'm pretty sure it was licensed.
Yeah,
It may have been like he may have tried to get away with it at first, but my recollection is, because I don't remember there being a lawsuit about that.
No,
I think
me
it was
neither.
licensed. Yeah, I think it was licensed, but obviously it's the David Bowie use.
So out of all these cases, like which one in court was like the most fulfilling for you? Did you like them?
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's a really interesting question, because I've had several really great cases that went to trial that we won. One of which is from the Bridgeport litigation, which was we received the largest verdict in sampling history against Diddy, Combs, and Bad Boy Records. It was a sampling of my client's Ohio Players song "Singing in the Morning" by Notorious B.I.G.'s "Ready to Die," but it was released on Bad Boy Records. And that litigation was so controversial when we filed it, to sue the entire rap music industry. And literally it was me against every big law firm, entertainment law firm in the United States. They all had a piece of it. And it was like little old me against, and I was still kind of a kid then, against everybody.
Wow.
And there was a lot of negative press about it. There was a lot of, this is just, BS, blah, blah, blah. So when we won that case, that trial, and we won it in a slam dunk fashion where we got 100% of the defendant's profits, gross revenue. We got punitive damages, which is unheard of in a copyright infringement case. Wow. And we only got it because we were able to bring the claim under state law claims for a few reasons. I could explain it to you if you cared to know, but we won the largest verdict ever in a sampling case. So to win that with all the odds stacked against us in that litigation was incredibly satisfying. Of course, the digital download case that we ultimately won in the Ninth Circuit was incredibly satisfying, just because, again, all the record labels took the position that the agreements between the labels and iTunes were sale agreements, and they could pay the artist a very low royalty rate rather than the 50% net receipts royalty rate that applied to licenses. Wow. So to win that, and it was satisfying not only to win that, which was a landmark decision at the time, and to have the court rule that Eminem and the production company were entitled to 50% of net receipts.
Yeah, that's amazing.
It was incredible. But not only that, but then it spawned class actions by Me Too plaintiffs, who all these older artists that relied on royalties that were being underpaid, class actions, and many individual lawsuits. I represented James Taylor in a similar lawsuit after that. And everybody getting paid appropriately was incredibly satisfying. So that was great too. And then, of course, Blurred Lines, that was in the news. It was like the biggest news story of the day.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And again, there was this media push by the other side that this is BS. It's just a copying of a genre. It's just a copy of an era. It's not compositional copying, and that this would ruin music for everyone and stifle creativity. So when we won that, it was obviously in the news, first front page. Donald Trump tweeted about it, believe it or not, when we won. It's kind of funny. And it was like literally, I was on the front page of the New York Times. So, I mean, that's incredible. And then I've had a few others that may not be as well known, but are incredibly satisfying. So I guess the short answer to your question is every time I win one, it's incredibly satisfying for a different reason. I take these things very personal for my clients. Mm-hmm. They are living and dying with this. And I think that's one of my best attributes as a lawyer and as just a person. As I fight, I give it everything I got. I do it like it's my own life on the line. And so when we win together. And so just that relationship and that satisfaction of doing this for them. And it was incredibly important for the gay family to win that Blurred Lines case. I can't even tell you how important it was. And all of them have been that way. So
it's an amazing verdict, really is, that whole thing. That's
yeah.
Just, or the jury, with the jury award, and then the judge brought it back to like the $5 million.
Yeah, but and it's even bigger than that, because I don't know if you're aware of the details, but I'm not gonna, I don't want to bore everyone with these details, but it's a very important issue. Prior to 1978, the Copyright Office only accepted written notation as a deposit copy when someone wanted to register their copyright at the Copyright Office. Now they accept the recording as a deposit copy, but they used to only accept written notation. But music is created in the studio. Marvin Gaye's not sitting there writing out written notation. He's creating the song as he records it.
Right.
And so what happened was, what happened before 1978 was, after songs were created, the publisher would hire just some transcriber to sketch out the composition, not even do the full transcription, just a little sketch, just to get the copyright on file with the Copyright Office. Well, prior to trial, the judge ruled that under the 1909 Copyright Act, which governed songs before January 1, 1978, and Got to Give It Up was a 1977 song, that under his interpretation, that our composition was limited to the elements in that lead sheet deposited at the Copyright Office, and not the compositional elements that were actually in the recording that Marvin Gaye created. So our case went from 15 elements down to like 4, because those were the only ones that were reflected in the lead sheet. And the judge didn't let us play Marvin Gaye's Got to Give It Up at trial, because he said to do so would be to expose the jury to elements he's saying is not part of the composition. So we had to litigate that case literally with one arm tied behind our back. And we still won. But the bigger point that I'm making is that decision is really problematic, because it's disenfranchising songwriters of what they've created. Think about it. Marvin Gaye is no longer the author of Got to Give It Up. Some dude who transcribed it after the fact just to get the song registered with the Copyright Office and only sketched out the composition, he's now the author. And
right.
All the elements that are not in that lead sheet are not part of the composition. So now people can just go to the Copyright Office, see what's not in the lead sheet, and copy it. It's in my mind, it's an awful decision.
Wow. That's crazy. So let me pivot a little bit. So Neil Young, I think you recently sued President Trump regarding the song that Trump was using. Can you tell us a little bit about that? When it's legal, licensing of music to use in campaigns? And
it's very interesting that you mentioned that, because I have my own podcast. I don't know if you know that or not.
Yeah, we're going to get to that. That's awesome.
The reason why I mentioned it is I just talked about this very issue on my podcast, Blurred Laws in Life.
Okay.
And so I'm very familiar with this case, and I'm very familiar with the legal issues that are involved.
Okay.
So in order to publicly perform a musical composition, the venue has to have what's called a BMI or ASCAP license. So BMI and ASCAP are public performance organizations, and every songwriter registers their songs with either BMI or ASCAP. And then BMI or ASCAP issue blanket licenses to broadcast networks, to venues, and restaurants, clubs, things of that nature, so they can publicly perform those songs. The problem is that the BMI and ASCAP license does, for a venue, like for a place where a campaign event might be held, does not cover third-party events. So the Trump campaign would have to get the BMI or ASCAP license from BMI or ASCAP. They couldn't rely on the venue, the hotel, or wherever the campaign event's taking place, could not rely on their license. So if they didn't get a specific license for their campaign, they're not covered, and it's copyright infringement, because that's unlawful to publicly perform without a license. Furthermore, if that campaign event is broadcast on television or on the internet, then you also need what's called a synchronization license from the publisher or songwriter, that being Neil Young, directly, because synchronization license is required when you're combining video with music. So if it's appearing on television or the internet, then you need that as well.
Okay.
So if they didn't get either of those, then they're in trouble. Also, they would need a license from the owner of the sound recording. And interestingly, you could also bring certain state law claims for example, false endorsement. Because what the problem these artists have is that by playing the music, it's the implication is that they're supporting the campaign.
Right.
And they're making like this, so they're like trying to say that, Neil Young is supporting Donald Trump. So that's what pissed him off. So you could bring a claim, you could possibly bring a claim for false endorsement.
So it's like the licensed practical piece, and then it's like the don't piss the musician off piece. Kind of.
Oh yeah, it's all of that. I mean, the whole thing is don't piss the musician off, because they would, that's the whole point.
Yeah, I mean, he just he couldn't have liked that, I guess.
No, he didn't. I mean, he said, "Rockin' in the Free World." There was a quote. He said, "Can you imagine what I felt when I heard that song being played at the Donald Trump campaign?"
Yeah. So has that you said that has been resolved?
It just got filed, so nothing's happened with it. I don't think anything, is going to ultimately. I mean, he'll stop playing.
There's no damages, right? Like you need to prove some sort of damages.
Well, there's statutory damages if you engage in willful copyright infringement without actual damages. You can still get willful damages up to $150,000 for willful copyright infringement.
Gotcha. So you mentioned your podcast, so I'm curious about that. Like, what has been like the highlights of that? Like, what are you doing on your podcast? Does the name actually have to do with any of the cases that you?
Of course, blurred laws in life. I mean, come
on. I had to go there, but that sounds awesome. So, how long have you had it? Like, what are you doing?
So, what happened was, I represent Michael Rappaport. Michael. He's an actor. He has his own podcast called I Am Rappaport. And I got to know his producers, Jordan Winter and Miles Davis, and they said to me, Richard, with your personality and the cases that you won, you'd be great to have your own podcast. And, I'm so busy that I never really seriously considered it. But then when COVID hit in March and I was sequestered and I was, sheltered at home, I was like, you know what? This might be a good time to do it. And I've been doing it since the beginning of March. And every week we're up to 20 episodes ourselves.
Wow.
And it's been a blast. I absolutely love it.
That's awesome.
And so what I try to do is make it a combination of legal issues, the cases that I've been involved with, the cases I am involved with, cases that are in the news that I have an expertise in that I can comment on. But I also try to mix it up with guests. I've had a lot of incredible guests from the entertainment business industry, my own clients. It's been a lot of fun, and I like, as you can tell, I like to interject my own personality. I'm not a dry dude, and I like to inject humor into it and make it funny. And I'm telling my own story through it. And I think some of the things that I've done could be inspiring to people who are, trying to make it as lawyers or in any field.
That's great.
And I try to inspire too. I really do. I try to inspire.
I love that. That's great.
And give people, hope that, if I can do it and I come from absolutely nothing,
yep,
then they can do it too. And that's something that's a part of my personality that I've always had. And maybe it's because of how I grew up, but I never thought anyone was better than me. And I always thought that I could do it. If you can do it, I can do it. That's always been my attitude.
I think that's an amazing premise, amazing motto to go by. I really do. I believe in that 100%. So that's great that you have that.
Yeah, and I mean it allows me. It has allowed me to persevere. Literally when I went to New York to take on, I was 25 years old, literally, and I was up against Skadden Arps and Kramer Levin and all the big firms in New York against me, and they were like my age now, right? The lawyers. I was like,
oh yeah, yep.
And I like to say, I either took one deposition 600 times or took the same or took 600 depositions. But I literally deposed everybody and did all the legal work, and what an amazing. And then to go up against every major entertainment law firm. I mean, I don't know what gives me the confidence to be able to do that, and gave me the confidence then. I mean, now I've obviously have done it, so I've got that confidence. But then I'm not sure why I believed it, but I just did. I just felt like I could do it, and we did it.
You must have loved it. You must have loved the law or what you were doing at some point, right? Were you well, go ahead, answer that first.
I don't know that I would say that I love the law, but what I did have is fear of failure, a real fear of failure. Like I didn't have a safety net.
Yeah.
I knew if I didn't make it, then where was I going? I don't have a daddy with money. I don't have, there was nothing there for me unless I succeeded on my own. So from the time I began law school, I went to law school thinking I wasn't going to make it because I had never studied really. I, made it through college with decent grades and didn't study for the SAT. I thought all these people would be so much smarter than I was and I wouldn't be able to compete. But I got there, and the first day I was like, oh, I got these motherfuckers. I was like, I got it. And I literally lived in the law school library. I graduated fourth in my law school class. I ended up clerking for a federal district judge at a law school for a year. And I always take pride in outworking and outthinking and, everyone. I don't want to sound like the Survivor slogan for the TV show Survivor, but I mean, outwit, outwork, outlast. I mean, that's what I try to do. And I've tried to do that for my entire life. And it's worked well for me. And, just always wanted to win. I have this desire to win.
And so you're loving the podcast, obviously. Are you going to continue it?
Yeah, I absolutely am going to continue it. Like I said, I did it kind of just as something to do. And what's great about it is my clients are digging it. My friends are digging it. It's something that people are telling me they look forward to every week.
Wow.
And like I said, I've had great guests. I've had like the guy who created Fox Sports. I've had Scott Schreer, who did all the theme music for all the Fox Sports shows, among many others. I've had Jillian Michaels, who's a client of mine, on the show. I've had the great Al Bell from Stax Records on the show. I've had, I'm going to forget somebody now. Say, Jan Gay's been on the podcast. I've had, Donna DeVerona, who was a great female Olympian, was on the program. I mean, it's not only
lawyers. It's like
no. A lot of people in the entertainment. What a great guest I had. He was so awesome. Brian Tyler, you know who he is? He's the #1 composer for film and television music working today. He did all the Fast and Furious movies. Wow. He did Crazy Rich Asians. He's done the Avengers. And we talked about everything from, how music in movies are composed, how they come about to, he went to Harvard and got a master's in philosophy and loves quantum physics. We talked about alternate realities and multi-spheres and you just name it. We talked about it. It was a blast. We talked about copyright infringement and what he thought of blurred lines. I mean, it's just been incredible. And I've all these people are clients, they're friends. They're coming on and they're enjoying it, and they're telling me.
How can we find it? Is it on? Do you have a YouTube channel?
It's on. I don't know if it's on YouTube. It is on every single streaming platform.
Is it video? Is it video too, or
it's just audio?
Just audio. Okay, so Spotify.
It's on Spotify. It's on Apple. It's on every streaming platform. It's on. Google,
are you suing Spotify right now too?
Yes, I am. I am suing Spotify. I sued Spotify already.
All right.
For copyright infringement on behalf of several music publishers because the allegation was they didn't get licenses for the compositions. And now I'm representing 8 Mile Style, which is the music publisher that controls most of Eminem's songs. And I'm representing 8 Mile Style in a similar lawsuit, yes.
Gotcha.
And by the way, that's an interesting one because Congress passed what was called the Music Modernization Act in 2018, which was designed to at least try to give the Spotifys of the world immunity from liability. But among other things, we're claiming that law is unconstitutional. So that's an interesting part of that case.
Right. So, Richard, we have a few minutes left, but I do want to ask one thing because I've read a lot about what you're doing in some articles, Billboard, Rolling Stone had all the cases. I just read something online and your case is the head case with blurred lines. It's crazy. And I totally remember the back in the day, the Two Live Crew, obviously they're just totally making making fun of Pretty Woman, they got away with that because it's a different sort of legal finding.
That was parody. That was a parody case.
It was a parody. They found it as parody, fair use,
Yes.
So my question for you is first of all, you have you have some cases that are ongoing, and like, what do you do? Like when they try to paint you as like the villain to like the music industry, or like,
I
do you
love
have
that.
I mean,
Well,
you love that. Okay. So you're like the Dennis Rodman of like,
Well, no, it just depends on what side you're on, right?
wasn't really,
I'm representing the underdog. I'm representing the songwriters
right.
and the people whose work have been allegedly taken. I'm representing the people
Right.
who haven't been paid royalties. So when they say I'm the most feared man by the music, all this kind of crap that's said, it's basically from the perspective of the major record labels or the main, it's not from the perspective of my clients who love, the work that we do and come to me and I get calls every day from people in the music business. I just filed a major lawsuit on behalf of Round Hill Music Publishing against TuneCore for copyright infringement. They're an aggregator for digital downloads. So my view of life is if your enemies or your opponents like you too much, then you're not doing a good job.
Okay. No, I mean, I think it's really interesting work, and you also think that it's you're not really afraid of the chilling effect. You think it just forces artists to be more original with like what they're
Exactly.
doing.
I mean, if you know you can't get away with, if you think you can get away with something, you're going to rely, it's like a crutch, right? But if you know that you're going to be held accountable, if you copy someone's work, then you're going to be more original. And the positive aspect of the blurred lines litigation is that, first of all, have there been any other cases like blurred lines really since then? No. So this idea that it was going to stop people from whistling in the street, no one's going to be able to hum without getting arrested, is just crazy. And there's no huge number of cases that have been filed since then. And what's been great in my mind is that you've seen a few times where someone came to someone else and said, I think you copied my stuff, and they resolved it right away. Like Tom Petty went to Sam Smith and said, I think you copied my stuff. And guess what? It got resolved. There was something with Mark Ronson and the song Uptown Funk, same thing.
You think is it intentional? Is it intentional most of the time when they copy it, like they know what they're doing, you think?
I can't say all the time there is that. I mean, you can prove it, you can see it if that's the case. I mean, there is, going back to there was a case involving George Harrison and My Sweet Lord, where the court said that, subconscious copying is still copyright infringement.
Okay.
The fact that it's not intentional is not a defense. That even if you heard it somewhere and now you're using it, even if it's subconsciously, it still can be copyright infringement. Now, the damages might not be the same. There's penalties for willfulness, but it's still copyright infringement if you copy someone else's work. But for me to say people, the people that are sued all the time intentionally know what they're doing, I can't say that. I mean, in many of my cases, I was able to prove that. In some, we weren't able to prove that. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if you can prove the infringement.
That's awesome. So Richard, is there anything else you want to say to the Lawyer Stories community here? This has been an awesome conversation. I know we could go on talking about all these cases. It's super interesting and of public interest. But what else would you like to convey to like anybody out there?
I don't know. I mean, if I'm talking to young lawyers or people in law school who are, if that's the audience that I'm talking to, then I guess the story of my career has been that if I can do it, anyone can. I mean, I didn't go to a top 10. I didn't go to a top 10 law school. I went to a very middle of the road law school.
Where did you go to school?
Loyola.
Yep, Loyola. Yep.
I got into and I just busted my ass and thought that I could do it and did it. And like I said, graduated top my class and then took on everyone as pretty much soon thereafter without fear. And just I guess the one thing I would always tell people is to believe in yourself and to believe that you can do it and that no one out there is really better than you are. And if you have that belief in yourself, there's nothing you can't accomplish.
Man, that's huge. And like, it's something that I think everybody needs to really let sink in and internalize. It doesn't matter if you're 20 and you know that, or if you're 30 or if you're 40 and you're just figuring that out. I think it's super important to know that, So I love that advice, man.
Well, listen, bro, I really appreciate you having me on this.
Yeah,
I am
awesome.
happy to come back any other time you want to have me. And yeah, that's the one piece of advice I'd give anyone is just always believe in yourself and work your ass off and don't ever let anyone outwork you.
Awesome, Richard. Thank you. It's our pleasure. Keep up the great work. It's super interesting. I love reading about all of it. I read so much about what you're doing. wicked cool stuff. And so everybody out there, Lawyer Stories, lawyer_stories on Instagram. You can find this podcast. You're listening to it now, but it's video on YouTube. We're on Apple Podcast, Spotify. We also have a website, thelawyerstories.com. We have a Facebook page, and we're building the biggest community that you ever did see. So again, thank you so much, Richard Bush, for your time. A famed copyright lawyer. And wherever you are in the world today, enjoy yourselves. Cheers.
All right. Thank you.
The Lawyer Stories podcast is produced by Marketing the Law. Are you looking at your social presence every day? Potential clients are. Learn how to magnetize your brand with the help of Marketing the Law. Find us on Instagram at Marketing the Law to learn more.